In the endless sweep of the untamed frontier, where the sky seemed to stretch forever and the land itself demanded strength from those who tried to tame it, life was not for the faint of heart. Every man and woman who carved a living out there carried a story, often heavy with struggle, sacrifice, and loneliness. Among them was a mountain man, rugged and hardened by seasons of snow, hunger, and solitude. He had survived by wit and will, but survival alone was not enough to soothe the ache in his chest. What he longed for was companionship, someone to share the long, silent nights, someone to soften the hard edges of his life. On the other side of the wilderness lived a rancher, wealthy by frontier standards, his cattle spread across wide pastures and his ranch house standing proud against the horizon. To the world, he appeared a man who had it all: land, livestock, hired hands to work his fields, and coin enough to buy whatever supplies he needed. Yet behind the strong walls of his ranch lay silence, a silence that echoed louder than the rumble of stampeding herds. The rancher, though rich in possessions, was desperately poor in companionship. He carried his loneliness like a brand on his soul, hidden from sight but burning deep. When the mountain man first came across the rancher, it was not by design but by chance. A storm had rolled down from the high peaks, fierce and merciless, driving him from the shelter of the pines into the valley below. Exhausted and half-frozen, he stumbled upon the rancher's land. It was there, at the edge of a fence line dusted with snow, that their paths first crossed. The rancher, mounted high in his saddle, eyed the stranger with suspicion at first, for in the frontier a man had to be wary. Yet something about the mountain man's worn eyes and humble bearing stirred recognition, the recognition of another soul carrying burdens unseen. What began as a wary exchange soon grew into something more. The rancher offered food, warmth, and a place to rest his weary bones. In return, the mountain man offered labor, his strong hands proving useful around the ranch. Day by day, the rancher began to notice something unusual about this stranger. He worked not for coin, nor for gain, but with a quiet devotion, as though he were offering pieces of himself in the tasks he performed. The nights on the ranch stretched long. By the fire, the two men would sit in silence, their words few but their presence heavy with meaning. The rancher, who had grown used to the hollow echo of his own company, found a strange comfort in the mountain man's nearness. The mountain man, who had only known the cold embrace of the wilderness, found warmth in the rancher's gaze. Something unspoken flickered between them, as delicate and dangerous as flame in the wind. It was during one of those nights, when the fire cracked and shadows danced along the walls, that the mountain man's longing spilled out. With a voice roughened by years of silence, he spoke words that carried both humility and desperation. "Please," he whispered, eyes cast down, "allow me to put the tip." The words hung heavy in the air, raw and trembling with meaning far deeper than their surface suggested. It was not just a plea for physical closeness but a cry for acceptance, for permission to break down the wall that had kept his heart locked away. The rancher's heart trembled at those words. For years he had built barriers around himself, walls as sturdy as the fences that guarded his land. Yet here stood a man willing to humble himself, to ask not with pride but with bare vulnerability. The rancher knew the weight of loneliness all too well, and in the mountain man's plea he heard an echo of his own unspoken desires. The frontier was a harsh judge of affection, and bonds of such nature were rarely spoken aloud in those times. Men were expected to be stone, unyielding and untouchable. But the rancher, looking into the mountain man's weathered eyes, saw truth. He saw a man who had faced hunger, storms, and wolves but was more afraid of rejection than of death itself. In the silence that followed, the rancher reached out, his hand rough from years of work, and placed it gently on the mountain man's shoulder. No words were needed, for the gesture itself was an answer. It was permission, it was acceptance, it was a surrender to the truth they had both tried to deny. What unfolded in the days and nights that followed was not the stuff of dime novels or ballads sung around campfires. It was quieter, simpler, and yet profoundly deep. They shared meals cooked over open flames, laughter rare but genuine, and long rides across the open range where the sky seemed endless and the air tasted of freedom. In the presence of one another, their burdens grew lighter. The rancher, once surrounded by silence, now had a companion whose presence filled the emptiness. The mountain man, once hardened by solitude, now had a place where his heart could finally rest. Their bond was tested, as all bonds are. The frontier was not forgiving, and whispers spread quickly when neighbors noticed the closeness between the two. But where others saw something strange, they saw salvation. For what is a man without companionship? What is wealth without someone to share it with? The rancher realized that no herd, no land, no coin could equal the worth of the man who had stumbled onto his land one stormy night. And the mountain man, once rootless as the wind, discovered that he had found not just shelter but home. The story of the mountain man and the lonely rancher is not merely about longing or pride but about the courage it takes to admit need. In a land where men were taught to be unyielding, two souls dared to be vulnerable. The mountain man's plea, simple, trembling, and sincere, broke the silence that had weighed on both their lives. It was a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, where survival consumed every waking moment, the human heart still yearned for warmth. And so, under the wide skies of the Wild West, where coyotes howled at the moon and the wind carried the scent of sage, two men found companionship in one another. Not through grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but through the quiet strength of shared moments. The mountain man, who once begged with nothing but sincerity, no longer had to ask. The rancher, who once endured silence, no longer sat alone by the fire. Together, they carved a story of love and companionship, hidden away from the judgment of the world but truer than anything the land could take from them. The frontier, wild and unforgiving, had a way of breaking men. But in each other, they found something unbreakable. Their story, though whispered and often misunderstood, carried the truth that in the end, every soul, no matter how rugged or proud, longs for the same thing: a place to belong, a hand to hold, and the courage to ask, "Please, allow me." Would you like me to make this more romantic and emotional, leaning into the tragic love story style, or more cinematic and western, like a frontier tale for a YouTube storytelling channel?